So, welcome to hosting the machine. So I'm not going to take too much time. We'll dive into all the fantastic work everyone's made very quickly, just to kind of like give you a broad overview of what the idea was. Um, Essentially, um, when Sukanya and Ravi sort of invited me to be to participate in this program for shared ecologies, one of the fundamental questions that I was kind of like trying to unpack just personally as well was how do we navigate this kind of shifting terrain that we find ourselves in as artists, confronted with these technologies that can essentially do or claim to do everything that we've been doing, like the entire history of art making in a more fundamental sense has sort of been at least the marketing around these technologies is that it is sort of like out of our grasp now. It is sort of somehow, um, uh, these machines can do exactly what we do. It can think and make in the way that we have been doing for all this while. And that was one of the questions that we attempted to unpack collectively as part of this cohort. And what we arrived at were not just what these technologies aren't able to do, but also a few questions that they raise in terms of how the broader idea of what we understand as intelligence is being framed as. So we get into this as we sort of progress through everyone's presentations. But one of the ideas that kind of came out, particularly for me, was that all is not lost, and there are a lot of things that are essentially unavailable to pure technology, the way it sort of claims to create not just art but create at large, and a lot of ways in which these technologies can be subverted, can be counteracted, and can be messed with as part of like practices uh, that you and I are kind of like involved in. Right. So with that, once again, welcome to hosting the machine. So I'd like to start us off with sharing Pawel's work. And Pawel sadly couldn't join us today, uh, but I'd like to take you through her work just very briefly. Um, just give me a second. Right. So Echo Maker, and right, one of the ideas that kind of has sort of evolved even with these image generation and text generation algorithms that are kind of proliferating around us, is that there's this onus on the faculty of sight, right? Perception. Um, we encounter these images purely, the other faculties of not just hearing, touch, smell are subsumed, but there's this kind of like world that has been conjured, not just through these algorithms, but even how we encounter these images or on social media or like through propaganda, things like that. There's this onus on sight. What you see is what you are made to believe. Um, Now, to this sort of contention that is playing out, Pahul created this world where she sort of brings uh, the faculty of hearing, of listening, um, both in a material but a conceptual sort of, more than a phenomenal knowledge, but a conceptual sense as well of the echo. She kind of brings back the onus over there. So just like diving into a world, and this was made with New Art City. You can still see the screen, right? Um, right. So that's the world she created, and there's these kind of floating shell ears that you see, and Right. So she has this, it takes you to this page where when you say, there's a voice that speaks back. And as you kind of play with it, you realize that it's kind of speaking back to you. So it's a, rather than a chatbot, uh, it just keeps going, and like it's kind of like when you sort of see this, especially in the light of the kind of programs that are the AI assistants, so to speak, who are the voices that are given to them are predominantly feminine and subservient, and are not allowed to sort of, like, the idea of agency is completely subsumed, right? What you have is with Siri or Alexa, you have these kind of, like, attendants who are always on call, and they are supposedly claimed to be intelligent, right? Now, what happens when a voice, when this attendant voice becomes an interlocutor that is constantly challenging you by asking you back those same banal or existential questions that you might pose to it. Powell takes us to another world where, and then like, I mean, I'd invite you to play this by yourself as well, where she takes on essentially
Hold your tongue. Can you listen? Can you speak?
so now I'm typing mother tongue, but it's always going to right? Like, no matter what you type, it's kind of forcing you. So it's this, like,
In Punjabi, as in English, there are two voices, active and passive. The subject of an active voice acts. The subject of a passive voice. Mona, ਸਕੂਲ ਕਿੰਨੇ ਦਿਨ ਜਾਂਦੀ ਹੈ? ਮੋਨਾ ਸੋਮਵਾਰ ਦੇ ਸਵੇਰੇ ਕੀ ਕਰਦੀ ਹੈ? ਮੋਨਾ ਗੁਰੂਵਾਰ ਦੇ ਸਵੇਰੇ ਕਿੱਥੇ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਹੈ?
right. So I won't give away the entire game. It's incredibly fun and, like, excruciating to play. One of the things that she, Bahul also mentioned when we were kind of, like, speaking about this at this work was that like, if as a game designer, you have the player who's playing the game, right? But then who is the game designer playing? And I still remember she kind of laughed and said that, like, she's playing the player, right? And the entire structure of this thing is this, excruciating bureaucratic document that you are being forced to kind of work around. And it becomes even more fun when you try to, like, sidestep it, try to break the logic of the game that it's that she's put together. Right. I'm going to post this in the chat. I'll also stop sharing. And, yeah, I invite you to check it out. Yeah, and okay, before I just hand it over to Sudhir, I'm also going to share the site link, so that you can check out everyone's work and kind of, like, explore the games people have made, the worlds people have made, and yeah, thanks. So Sudhir, over to you.
Okay, so I'll share my screen immediately. Just point it out if you're not able to listen to the audio or look at the videos or listen to audio from the video. Uh, okay, I cannot share the screen because the host needs to then give the
Try
access.
again.
Okay, yeah, now I can. So you can see the screen, right? Uh, just a second. Make some. Okay. So the project is called the convoluted passage. I will explain what convoluted passage or convolution as such means over the course of the presentation. But before doing that, so the whole presentation is somehow divided into four different categories since we are dealing with text, images, object, and spaces. Now this is again specifically for the kind of output that we were looking at the start of the workshop, that it has to be a virtual space eventually. So we are talking about a kind of architectural speciality as such at the end of the workshop, you know. And that is something which is derivational, starting from all of these automated language models, or like for instance you have ChatGPT right now and other image processing models and stuff like that, but all of them automated. And also this was back like last year, as early as even before ChatGPT came into the commercial use as such. So let's start with text first. So again, like my way of most of my work is extremely formal, like not this project, even the projects that I've worked on before. So, which means it delves into making images at a very formal, in a very formal manner. So, at a certain point, the content may not be of so much important. So, in this case, specifically, with this project, it somehow escalates this formal process. This is part and parcel because of the very idea that when you type a text, you suddenly have an image, or when you type a text, you have a text because of these automated tools that are very commonly used nowadays. So for me, this is completely absurd. At least it was when I started last year. So I was trying to somehow make a formal method to somehow navigate through this, and in an attempt to, you know, like produce an output which is somehow produced from this method, not just simply typing a text, which is, let's say, a fraction of a few seconds interaction with the computer per se. And also, I believe that when you type a text and then you get an image, the image is not something which is completely new. You know, it is mostly data extraction. It's something that you like all of these servers on image processing tools, they have enormous amount of data. So what these, when you type a text, it does not really reproduce a new image for you. It is only going to extract data from the already possible images which are there in their server. So there is no formation of new image, you know. So you already have images beforehand, and then it only produces multiplicity as such. So the input in this case, because I at a certain point had to give the starting point. So in this case, the starting point was this text from this book, Year of Passages. Now the book in itself is of no relation to the project that I'm proposing right now, because it only serves as a content, you know, like a space holder as such. What we are only going to look at right now is the very formal process of how the text is mediated into further text, images, and over the course videos and stuff like that. So I input this text and I get something like this, uh, like I built upon it and all. And the green things which you see, the highlighted ones, are something of interest to me because somehow the whole text, which you can read it briefly, it's very expressive. Expressive as such, in a manner that it has a lot of visual quality, you know, like things which, for instance, stemless flowers or pen knife or melting birds. So these are like quite interesting sort of words which could have a possible visual connotation, you know. So these are of interest to me. So I started using them. So this becomes the primary input now, which is again the output coming from the previous input. This becomes the input. So I've designed like a node system where I produce something that becomes the input for the next procedural method, and then the output of that becomes the following corresponding procedural method input over the course. So again, the list of same inputs, and on the right side, what you have is a conception of what a possible virtual space may look like. Now, the whole derivation of the space on the right side is something what can be defined as convolution. Convolution as such is an image processing technique, which I explain in the next slide. So the whole process of producing the space starts with a text, then it goes to prompt. So somehow I make the text and then it goes to prompt, and from the prompt it goes to images, image to object, and object to movement. And when you have movement around these objects, somehow you have an understanding of what a possible space may look like. For the passage. So I was thinking what convolution means. Like convolution in itself is something very complex, like a fabricated sort of layering of structure, which somehow seems very difficult to navigate through and stuff. But then I was thinking what convolution means in image processing, because convolution in itself is a mathematical property which is briefly used in modern day, like signals and signal sourcing and stuff like that. Basically, like any system which functions on sensors or signals and stuff like that, they have convolution as a mathematical equation before they signal out stuff in a way. So there are two such methods. One is linear space invariant system (LSI), and the other one is linear time invariant system. So again, like space invariant system is something, if I were to give an example, like imagine you have a ground and the ground has a material, let's say a paper block. So the paper block, materiality of a paper block has several functions, several functions in terms of which is constantly acting in accordance to the gravity, and there's also friction. So if you, let's say, roll a ball on a paper block, it's going to roll in a certain manner, because there are two functions at play. One is the friction, the other one is the gravity. And every time you roll a ball, the ball is going to roll in a certain manner. So that, this act. Hi, can you hear me, by the way? Are you able to listen to the audio?
Yes, we can hear the audio. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Sorry. Sorry, just a second. I thought it was not audible, so I'll just. This is sorry. So this is actually a video which I pre-recorded. In this case, I'm explaining what the LSI means, because LSI is something which I somehow conceptualized in a manner to derive to what a space could be. So just bear through for like few minutes and. Yes, when you input a ball and like ball becomes an input here, because whatever you input in the system is going to act accordingly to the functions of the material, So the input, if the input changes, the output is also going to change, but always in constant conversation with the function. So that is linear space invariant system. Similarly, there's linear time invariant system also. An example of that would be, let's say a camera, for example, like you have a camera and you take a picture of whatever, the picture is going to be the output, right? But what is input in the camera is the light, because cameras work on light. And the input is always going to be different. And the camera is trained in a manner that there are several parameters which the camera, the function goes through, the system goes through when reading the input, and then finally the output is produced as an image. So convolution in this case, because now this is linear time invariant system, because the input is going to be the light, which is going to constantly change, and the output is going to be something which is in accordance to the input. And convolution comes into picture when such systems are, used to understand how the input is fabricating the output somehow, like to understand the input of the light in the camera, and then the resulting output, you input in, you use convolution as a mathematical equation to understand that. So convolution is called the convoluted passage. So again, so this is basically the space, and somehow I'm devising a method to generate prompts using the input which I produced from the previous text. And when I get the prompt, I produce the images, and these are the images. So this is again the second category. The first one was text, now images. These are the images which I will be using to produce the space eventually. So somehow they become an enclosure when you I just skim through all of them. And then the third one was the object. So I was also producing object using the same input, which is the prompt. These were produced on Luma, which is fairly recent. Like it came out 3 or 4 months ago. So with a text, you can also reproduce entire 3D objects. Of course, it's a very naive level. You can it's like photogrammetry models and a low poly count geometry, and obviously it has surface fluctuations and stuff like that. But still. So then there were series of objects which I produced, which would eventually be populated in the space. And then the space, which is the conception. So now, even this is a video, yes. You cannot see the passage. You cannot see the connecting passages right now because I have to add them. But these are just series of spaces which are motionless in a way right now, but I have to animate them too. Yeah, but what is interesting is that I mean, the images, like I mentioned earlier, that's not
What
working
have you
there.
done?
Makes no sense. But
Don't tell
yes,
yourself.
I get an idea that, yeah, this is, I don't know, like some object which are coming from the text which was devised earlier. But yes, for me, the process then becomes something interesting because you cannot look at this one space in its entirety itself, like you have to read the whole process to make some sense out of it in a way. And then these are images but PNGs, and you always have a transparency, which allows you to see through, and which allows this sort of culling which is happening right now according to my movement. So there's no animation, but still they look pretty animated in itself because there's a culling mask which is happening because New York City cannot register PNGs facing inwards because these cubes are, the normal map of these cubes are facing inwards. So they are always moving. Like when you are in this room, you will, like if you move your orientation, what you see is basically what is happening in this room. But if you move a little closer, you start seeing the walls of the next adjoining room. So something like this. And then when there are black pieces, black as in like with no alpha value overlapping, you get motifs like these, you see, because there's no alpha on the surface. Yeah, so that, I mean, I can take you around there. So this was the space which I created using the images. Like the basic idea was again organizing them in a corresponding like adjoining cubes per se. And then when I talk about using the objects also in an attempt to make movement around them, I started doing the whole process on Unity. Now the previous one was on New York City. So I take the whole space into Unity, and when I'm trying to populate the space on Unity, again using the same formal understanding of the whole process, I was also at the same point trying to record my screen. And when I recorded the screen using the video, I converted them to images, and from images, I reproduced the space which I was in a way creating on Unity. So it's a representation of a representation which I was doing on Unity per se. So this point cloud is a reproduced space, which I was already, let's say, composing, because again, I don't want to compose, as much as the whole process is generative, I would like it to be that way. And then the whole space is this. Finally, when I'm done composing it or generatively composing it on Unity, this is what it looks like. You have a summation of objects. Again, each of these square spaces are interiorities, which has images on either sides. They have corresponding objects which are also devised using the prompt which were used to devise the images. And the whole production of the space was documented somehow, like I said, by scanning, by video recording the screen. So that was reproduced on in terms of point cloud, and even that is there in the space. So this is what it looks like from the top. And then there are these videos where I also overlay the audio. So the audio is again the first text which I generated. And the whole idea was to show the space how chaotic it may look like when, like for instance, when you have no understanding of what the content could be, when you only solely focus on the formal understanding. That's it. So So it's a game. I'm actually also navigating around using the controllers, and these objects are interactable. I can pick them, I can throw them around them. But everything happens within this confined 4x4 grid. One more. There's also a lot of audio overlap. Again, the audio is like spatial audio. In one space, you'll have specific audio in relation to the images, in relation to the object. But since it is spatial, it also creates this kind of ambiguity where the audio is actually coming from, so there's so much of depth in that too.
Have you switched on the audio? We can't hear it.
You cannot hear it? Sorry.
We can't hear the audio. Within Unity, we can't, huh?
Is it audible? No? Were you able to listen to the audio in the previous videos also?
Yeah, but
In this one, you're not able to. Well, I can also put the link for this. I don't know what's happening because the audio is turned on and is the same video file. You still cannot hear it. Okay. Yeah, but this is it. Thank you. I can put the link to this. Sorry.
Sorry. Sort of question. No. Thanks, Sudhir. So I mean the first kind of like thing. Okay. So hey. First of all, it's Sudhir's birthday, so happy birthday once again. And thank you for sharing, Sudhir. So one of the first things that I was kind of struck by was also like by creating this collapse of an interior space and an exteriority. You've arrived at this kind of this complex kind of architecture, which is both the cellular and also cosmic in scale, right? Especially in the last sort of world, we see this, almost like a rendering of that the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics, right? Like where all outcomes, all directions that you can sort of navigate the world in are presented to you at once, and one might kind of like encounter that also as the anxiety of that immensity of experience. But then being able to kind of like move things around, kind of like have that hold over this world for the player, kind of also invites you to sort of confront that, like, with like not be burdened by it. You have to uh, move through that chaos and like kind of add to that chaos in a really mind-bending way, honestly. I'm sharing links to the worlds that everyone's created in the chat. Please feel free to like jump in, have a look at them. And okay, with that, we'll bring in Payal. Payal, will you go next?
Sure. Let me just
Thanks.
screen. Let me know if you can hear the sound. In my ongoing research, The Limit Beyond the Haze, I attempt to put together notions of distance and visibility while questioning the modes of obscurity subjugated to restrict one's vision.
Sorry, Payal, we cannot hear the audio in between, if there is audio.
Taking Sonipat as a point of departure,
Now we can.
locating my field of vision, 17.3 kilometers from the eighth-story apartment at Tulip Grand, where the horizon keeps shifting with respect to the atmosphere and the stubble burning at the onset of every winter. The horizon provides an interesting framework, a transient boundary to explore the limits of visibility and access. Horizon on the map is the limit beyond the gray area, areas not mapped yet. We see the world around us through frames. The sensory information gathered through the eyes has a limited field of vision. Thus, breaking down reality into cubes make it easier to comprehend. In the absence of sight, one would experience the same space as a sphere. The awareness of sound, wind, temperature builds the space by expanding it. I began photographing a solitary tree, moving in a circle around it. One morning, the smog came in and obscured everything around it, obliterating the space and moving through the fog. With each turn, the horizon line is absent. There is no ground. The The smog is reminiscent of a moment in the winter of 2016 when I emerged from my home into the Delhi smog of a demonetized and unsafe city environment. Almost as though the air was mirroring the political situation. A person is confronted by the same impenetrable whiteness with a cataract. A sharp, focused image becomes blurred, a cloudy area in the lens of the eye, causing an overall blurring and haziness of vision. Often sensitive to bright light and glare, the impairment is difficult to identify. It could take someone over 20 years to realize that what we are seeing is not what is before us. The brain adapts to the vision to tell you nothing is wrong. Signals intangible and incomprehensible, suspended in time. To think of what happens to them and their absence at the point of culmination. The imaginary line that recedes as you approach it not only did not need oxygen to stay alive, a sense of amnesia oxygen was lethal to them, that you cannot. Unluckily for some of them, through the course of their life cycles, produced oxygen themselves. The concentration of oxygen grew to such a degree that it now forms one of the main components of our atmosphere. These organisms perished, and there were new organisms that came into existence. The first organisms to appear on Earth not only did not need oxygen to stay alive, a medical impairment, agnosia, is the inability to recognize familiar objects.
Thanks, Payal. So I've shared the world that you created in the chat in the chat as well, and yeah, one of the first things that sort of also came to my mind with this architecture of fog, especially in game design. So one thing that you have, and the refrain that also you've been, yeah, you were kind of repeating of the point of culmination. So you have culling volumes, right? Which are essentially in game design, they are used to sort of create this idea that the world sort of extends infinitely, but then everything that is kind of hidden behind a fog volume is destroyed. The word it literally doesn't exist. It only appears the moment you sort of, you know, approach that receding imaginary line. And what happens with that kind of cartography is mapped, especially in the way that, like, fog is sort of generated in places like Delhi, not just from the pollution that is kind of spreading, where the world sort of completely is kind of put into that amnesiac sort of architecture. But also when it is sort of like bombarded with tear gas shells and things are occluded behind it. Uh, how does one, one idea that like I was also kind of thinking about, which maybe you can respond to, is like this these absences that are created in the architecture by the fog, that is what kind of brought on. What happens when that is kind of mapped onto the supposed territory? The physical material reality in which all of this sort of exists. And yeah, I was thinking about how you would respond to that.
Mapped onto what? Sorry, I didn't.
So, like what happens when those architecture of those absences, through fog, like things are hidden away. Like what kind of movements does it allow? And
Yeah, so I think this was something which began in 2016. That is when I started photographing that tree. And that is when demonetization happened and I experienced the smog in Delhi. While doing it now, I was also thinking that when there is lack of sensory information, so I was talking to somebody who has a visual impairment, and I was asking them how do they experience the same space, and they spoke of it being through sound, and basically the range of the ears is different from the eyes, which I found very interesting, that the frame limits it, and where experientially the same place is would be experienced differently without that sight. And then to bring this within the digital, I like the possibility in New York City of completely removing the horizon, because the ground and the sky was the same color, and that smog obliterates how far one can see. And I am thinking philosophically and politically, what is our position as witnesses when we cannot see ahead and where we are reduced to just see the self? Um, and you're forced also, the tear gas was in such a way that it isolates you. You're in a crowd, you're together. There is that sense of solidarity, and in that moment when there is that tear gas, there is a complete isolation. So, I mean, that was the thought behind. Yeah, I hope that, yeah. And there was a lot of wind sound, because I don't know if you all could hear it. So, yeah.
thanks. There's also this, I was just thinking this parallax view of, like especially with things like Google Maps, or even the idea that, social media is kind of like giving us all eyes everywhere. So this omniscient view, that is kind of like from one eye, and then from the other eye, you have this like completely occluded view, which is completely refusing any kind of like anything to appear. So there's a parallax of those, that complete vision and complete, blindness at the same time being being presented essentially. Okay. Thanks so much. So next, shall we go to Vineet?
Yeah, hi. Can you hear me? Yeah, just a second. So I'll share my screen. Okay. Um, So, just a few pointers. Like this is a website. This is my website where I've made a web page where the whole project is sort of laid out. Wait, is this? Yeah. So this is a web page where the whole project is laid out, and most of the stuff that I will talk about, I have written it down. Not all of it, but I'll write it down eventually in the next week or something. So everyone can have a look at this, and I'll put some more text over here in the abstract. And there are other links for different aspect of the projects over here. There is also a media archive where you can download everything that I have produced. And I will put more stuff over there. I just need to update these things. And this is the link for the New Art City World. So yeah, that being said, I'll start with giving the presentation. And in case if I run out of time, you can just interrupt me so that I can try to wrap it up. So yeah, and I'll go a little bit fast so that I'm able to cover everything. Because like even if you don't are not able to grasp it, you can check out all the material is here, so you can come back anytime. So yeah, I'll start with. So the project is called All That is Solid Melts into the Air. It is a phrase first used by Marx and Engels in the Communist Manifesto in the context of rapid industrialization and capitalist expansion of the 19th century, where which was leading to a dissolution of traditional societal structures and values, creating a sense of instability and impermanence. Later, Marshall Berman, American philosopher, he wrote a book with the same title, and he spoke about the same experience in the context of modernity. And like this phrase has been used like a Heraclitean pain to sort of emphasize the flux and impermanence of things, calling attention to the inevitable impending doom of a disappearance or dissolution of existing societal forms and figures to make way for the new. Almost always, in such a situation, the major catalyst for a period of such entropy or radical change has been a rapid development in the means of production, the systems of machinery that bring about a qualitative change in the way in which the world operates. So, that being the context, the whole project is framed around visualizing this phrase and the experience that changes in technology bring. Um, the project starts with a double narrative, a fundamental contradiction where two opposite movements produce a double narrative. And these are like two mutually exclusive ontologies. One where you begin with a void, like in the beginning, there is nothing, like there is just nothingness, and somehow something emerges within the nothing, and then it grows over and it sort of completely occupies the void. So the void is being filled, and one is wondering, why is there something, like what is the reason, what's the purpose of life, why are we, and what's the purpose of life. That's one narrative to think about things. The other is to think about existence in a way that there is being in the beginning and nothing emerges in the being, and then nothingness sort of grows and it empties out the being, and then one is asking, why is there nothing, why is there nothing at all. So these are like two different ways of thinking, from the point of view of the being or from the point of view of the nothingness. And this sort of creates a sort of like it's a spiraling down of thought, with one is going forward and one is sort of coming reverse. So here it's like a cosmological representation of the ways in which the world comes into being. And these two exclusive totalities, they can be thought of two different narratives as ideal hypothesis, but in reality they coexist and they are superimposed like a Mobius strip, which is represented in topological thought. But instead of using topology to think about these ideas, I was more interested in a theatrical way of diagramming them. So I've made a lot of diagrams, and here I have put some, but like I have, okay, I will not go into this. Like I have some more diagrams, but yeah, like maybe I will skip that part for now. We can come back to it later if time permits. And it is the entire narrative is revolving around this aspect where the being and nothingness are two states which are resultant of the split that the being experiences. Like here you can see like there are two situations. One is a complete black circle, which is nothingness. One is a complete white circle, which is the being. But this is just resultant of the being which is split into two and separated. And this separation is what creates these two different states. One is where there is the external aspect of being existing in isolation, and then on the other hand, there is the internal aspect of being existing in isolation. And this is a situation where none of them exist, and this is the situation where both of them exist, but it's not a union, it's a sort of a split. The split is still present even if they are they form a union. And there is always this trauma of the separation and the longing for the union which animates the tragic being. So this is a sort of a narrative which, like deriving from psychoanalysis and different chains of thoughts in philosophy, it's very like it's nothing new. These are not my ideas. But what I find interesting is the fact that the machine which holds the um ability to camouflage between the being and nothingness, it could be a being or it could be nothingness. Like it's the classic problem of representation when it's like Rene Magritte's painting, This Is Not a Pipe. Like you're looking at a pipe, but it's not a pipe, it's nothing, it's just paint on a canvas, but it is a pipe. So similarly, the machine also lies in this realm where it can be both. It can be uh, a being, but at the same time, it is just nothingness. And it also serves, like the machine as it serves as an extension to the human in many ways. What it does is by extending the human, it allows a lot of convenience, efficiency, but then at the same time, by doing this, it is simultaneously penetrating and inhabiting the most innermost crevices of a fragment of our fragmented and alienated existence, thus radically altering what is it to be human. So I have developed this part further, but instead of going into that, I will talk about the way in which I have used this philosophical base to sort of generate the world and create the material that I have used, where it begins with the beginning point is this dichotomous interplay between being and nothingness as they are continuously becoming each other. And through this interplay, a terrain, a dynamic landscape of like blobs, platters, different forms sort of emerges, not just like two isolated forms, but the being as it is fragmented and split multiple times, and as the nothingness sort of invades into the gaps between the fragmented existence of the being, it ends up creating a topography of varied forms. All these are AI generated images. And then these forms, they become a sort of a sample space. Like there could be infinite number of forms. All forms basically are derived through this fundamental condition. And simultaneously, as the forms are getting generated, a necessity for the name is also emerging. So in order for these forms to differentiate and to identify, the necessity of a name, the necessity of an identity emerges, and the idea of naming something. And using this, And name, it could be a name of a thing, a name of a person, a name of an institution. So what I did was I sort of made a list of different characters, names, body types, genders, nationalities, professions, like different ways in which the forms in the world are manifesting themselves, different perspectives, habits, moods, desires, structures, forms and spaces, books, paintings, religion. So just creating a sort of a database of list of these things. Like, so I made a database of 1300 names, 956 surnames, and so on, like 527 systems, 1000 whatever philosophers, 593 books. Just like taking a lot of lists and carefully curating them, I made a sort of a database. And this information was neatly stored in the database, and um, it was sort of, it became like a building. The database becomes like a sort of a base for creating narratives, where each word is a unit linked owing to its sequencing or unique identity number as a random seed. So the machine is then coded with a pseudo random number generator, PRNG, which is like one of the cursor for the way in which precursor for the way in which AI platforms are sort of modeled these days. And so the PRNG sort of picks up one unit from the list of these things. And then there are different algorithms like arithmetic compositional operators or string concatenation um, algorithms, which sort of make sentences which bring together a narrative. And so here, for example, these are different first names, and this is like different first names, different ages, features, abilities, sort of randomly picked, and they are forming a sentence. They are creating a character, basically. So the same happens with the perspective and the frame. The same happens with the structure and arrangement, objects, forms, and spaces. And then finally, you get a sort of a story where there is a person of a particular age or profession. So this is like a text generator that I built. I call it the world building machine. And this text generator sort of was, it sounds complicated, but it was actually built using just an Excel sheet. Like I used Google Sheets for building something like this. So this is just Google Sheets. And here, as I refresh, every time a new story is getting created. So I can just keep doing it. So I have infinite number of stories, all of them unique, because the probability with so much database is the fact that each story will be unique. So yeah, every time a new story is being created, like Hannah Sharp is a 37-year-old Paraguayan childcare worker. They identify as a scoliosexual transmasculine human. And it could be about anything like they are influenced by the male art and the philosophy of Mary Wollstonecraft. But ever since they saw the painting The Last Supper altarpiece by Derek Boots, they have decided to read. So it's like it just creates random stories. Sometimes they don't make sense, but in most cases, they end up making sense. And it's very simple, sort of, um, where I. So this is the world generator, the world building machine, and it is made with these lists. So here, this is like a list of names and nationalities, occupations, features, body types. So it's like a carefully curated list of all these. So it's like I'm building my own equivalent of a large language model, like even though this is a very small one and built by like there is no machine learning aspect over here, and it is just built painstakingly by just one person. So it certainly has its limitations, but it's sort of a like a toy model for the real model to sort of get the essence of the way in which this generative method works. So instead of writing through a compositional lens my own story, here I just build a database of different aspects and then the story is built. And each story here, like for example, here it is picking one thing from the list, and each thing has its own seed number. Each element, it has its seed number. So these are the words that are selected and a story is formed through them. And then each story is created with a unique seed number. So this is like a around 150 or 200 digit unique serial ID of this one particular story. So basically, yeah, like it just creates these infinite number of stories, and here it is showing how it is picking up the aspect. Like if you want to speak into the more details of it, like this is how I structure it, and here you can see the formula of concatenation string. So yeah, like um yeah, these were just some examples how I started with, like to build sentences. Like for example, the phrase "all that is solid melts into the air." You can just say "all that is bad nurtures into the ever-changing pit of death. All that is renewable validates into the holy hall of redemption." So it's just random. It creates different sentences which may or may not make sense, but most of the times they make sense. And through this, what happens is I made a prompt generator, because these are stories. Like if I put such a big story in image generator software, it will not produce, because for a prompt it needs to be emphasizing more on the visual aspects. So here I made, like this is the style sort of that I picked in order to give a sort of visual consistency, and with a little bit of, it's just logic. It's not even scripting. It's just logic based sort of a flow that I created, which makes gives this format to every prompt, and it creates a unique prompt of different characters. This is the time slot, and then it creates automatically a big prompt. So this is a very big prompt which I can just use in stable diffusion, and it will create me a video. So this is how I'll show you how I worked around with this. So using these prompts, I made these characters by sort of like the, no. So yeah. Okay, I think I deleted that part. But using these prompts, I like something like this kind of a prompt I would put, and I would generate images like these. So these are different characters, and because the same workflow has been used to create all these prompts, they have a sort of visual consistency. The all the images, they look like they have a similar aesthetic and they belong to one project, instead of having, because usually when you generate something using AI, there is not so much control over the aesthetic. Then what I did was I used Blender to sort of, I use this face building plugin where it analyzes the depth, and through AI powered mesh alignment, it creates a 3D mesh of the face. So the images that were generated over here, I made these heads out of the images, so slowly moving into the three-dimensional domain. And then the unique serial ID number that I was talking about, each story has a unique ID. So what I did is I wrote a script in Blender using geometry nodes. Geometry nodes is something like, it's like scripting, like the whole process of 3D form generation is sort of automated by giving you visual parameters which you can control. And through these nodes, because they are parametric, you can edit the values, you can sort of tweak the form. Like maybe it's like grasshopper in Rhino, if that reference works. So I made a sort of a blob which follows the torso of a like a T pose, like a human structure with two legs, a body, and two hands and a head. And each body is a unique body which sort of is generated when I put a different number. So every time I put a number of a particular story, so like one particular story, like this story will have let's say this character. So it's like you can just generate a lot of different characters. And this entire process, because it is automated by the world building machine, like I get all these prompts in a second. So the process of making the prompts is faster than the process of even generation. So and then after, so it's like I have the text, I have images, I have 3D models, so it's like slowly building the world. And then I started to play with the material that I have, like for example just looking at what has happened like through this translation, because I start with a list, then everything else is automatic. So this automatic generative mode, what does it exactly do? And uh, what happens in the process of translation as words become sentences, become stories, become images, become models. So here, for example, I was trying to go back. So if you unwrap, like UV unwrap the texture which I inserted on the face of these 3D models, because this is a flat image, which when you apply on a 3D model, it sort of distorts and it wraps around the face. But when I unwrap it, I got something like this, like these kind of faces. And this was a striking point for me because the kind of aesthetic it gave, it made all the faces like it opened up their mouths. It squished their face in the center and it sort of broadened the lower and the upper part of it. And it created this scary scream like aesthetic. And then like using the images to sort of make frame interpolation videos using like runway ml and these kind of softwares. And what I was interested in these was these intermediate frames where you have these distortions, like you start with an image, but then as you are transitioning to the other image, these distortions is something that I was interested in. So then according to these distortions, I sort of modified the style code in my prompt. And then I started doing the cut up technique where I take four prompts and then cut them up and use first half of the first prompt and the last part of the fourth prompt, match them up and create new prompts. So this entire process was also automated using the Excel. And then I got like these sort of images, and there are like different series of these images, like some of them, and also made using different platforms, some of them with stable diffusion, some with disco diffusion, some with playground AI, some with Luma. So just trying out different forms and seeing how different platforms react to the prompts that I'm creating. And yeah, but I will not go so much into explaining them right now. And then these were the videos that I generated through the automatically generated prompts. And in each part, I'm sort of playing with different aspects. Like here, for example, it is zooming out. So the kind of transitions that you get are different because something which is the size of a body starts becoming smaller and then it becomes a face. Here it is slowly zooming in, and like each time the prompt was slightly modified to get a sort of different formal outputs. And just like how a sign has like a signifier has nothing to do with the sign, like in linguistics, the way in which the relationship between a signifier and signified is completely arbitrary. The name, the serial UID, and the form, the mesh body, both have a precarious relation to each other, a connection that is held together merely by the interrelationships between the infinite differential chain logic that is emergent through the multiplicity of forms. So it's like none of this has actually, the entire process is completely arbitrary. But that is how language works. Like there is no reason why we call an apple or a banana, but in the entire chain of the system of language, because there are so many different things, and then one thing is, so it works with the dialectical logic of I versus not I. Like this is an apple because this is not a banana. So it's the same way, all these things, the text has no relationship with the image has no relationship with the body, but that relationship is automatically built, and it is justified by the process of the multiplicity of forms that are there. And it's no, it cannot be questioned. Like the arbitrariness sort of becomes the norm. And then I sort of built this immersive world in New Art City, and using the format of virtual reality experiences constructed using Unity based applications and also virtual exhibition platforms such as New Art City. Various versions of interactive experiences were staged. The gameplay narrative of this installation involved a player being spawned into the void, a transparent Um, a transparent glass sphere that happens to be positioned at the center of the chaotic multi-layered floating terrain that seems to be expanding endlessly in all directions. Immediately outside the void, there are some floating heads which are constantly looking at the player with a numb and somewhat intimidating stare, as if seeking some kind of confrontation or acknowledgement. Behind them are vertical bodies, um, and faces of various characters. No, behind them are vertical bodies frozen in a stretched out pose, spinning 360 degrees around themselves, as if on a display like a product. In the background are screens with animated projections of many more such similar bodies and faces of various characters mutating and transforming into new forms. And the setup is further contained within a swarm of fluid anamorphic blobs with eerie monstrous collages upon the surface, which seem to punctuate a huge porous fluid form that seems to be the final enclosure. So this is sort of a diagram of the immersive space that I built, and you can click here and you can enter the New Art City space. Um, so the result is an immersive theatrical setup which renders what seems like a disquieting dreamscape or a curious nightmare, evoking narratives evoking narratives such as the split between the mind and the body, the coercive. Okay, I cannot navigate and read the text at the same time. So I'll just walk through this for now. So it's basically this sphere, the void in which the player is spawned, and then as the player comes out of the void, can navigate around, and there are these heads floating with these bodies spinning around, and as you move away from the void, it is only visible from the distance of the head, but then it disappears, and then you are floating around with these around these bodies and these forms through this torus like anamorphic world where textures are sort of superimposed upon the floating blobs. And then the same world, like to try out different aspects, I made the same world in Unity, where I made like it is an application which you can experience by through a VR headset. And it's the same world, but there are certain scripts which the New Art City platform doesn't allow. So I tried them out over here. Uh, So yeah, evoking narratives such as the split between the mind and the body, the coercive power of screens, the groundlessness, the perplexity of distortions, the disjunction between form and image, the imprisonment of bodies, the claustrophobia of the overwhelming media junk, the constant motion uncontrolled, felt presence of an invisible power, the inescapability from its panoptic gaze, the simultaneous precision and arbitrariness of the algorithmic procedural generation, the centrality of the void, visible only through the mode of being split, and so on. So today, no longer just an assisting tool, the machine seems to be becoming a master, a relatively self-operating control mechanism governing implicitly almost everything, resulting in a life which is no longer truly lived, but having become mere aggregated data, further gathered and fed to algorithms which constantly synthesize, generate new realities, redefining choices, behavior, and imagination, thus reducing the human to an automaton. One might say that the AI does seem to offer many potentially liberating opportunities for the production of empowering narratives and subjectivities, as it holds the power to challenge and go beyond the all too narrow humanistic perspectives and necessities by effectively decentering and throwing away to the margins the enlightened narcissistic human ego, its anthropological compositional lens and assumed authoritative central status, moving towards a supposedly objective truth that the generative method provides. But in actuality, such possibilities remain a false horizon, um, very limited as the machine, far from being neutral, powerful tool in a socially divided and unequal post-capitalist neo-feudalist society, remains a victim itself, as it only favors the ideologies of corporations and oligarchs. The interactive experience mirrors the spectacle and horrors of a situation one witnesses today with the advancements in AI, where convenience, efficiency, and enjoyment is promised, but within an ethos of fear and panic, where in order to be critical, one is provoked to resist decoupling of intelligence from an empathetic consciousness and rethink what is it to be human. So, yeah, that's it. There are a lot of aspects which are missed out, but I think maybe in the question answers we can see where it leads. Oh,
Thanks,
yeah.
Ray. This was
Mhm,
like incredible. um, so again, I've posted Vineet's links in the chat. Please jump in on the world that he's created. Is something to be experienced. And another thing that, like, I mean, there's so many, and like, this is a conversation with you and I've been having for a while, but the sheer complexity that you arrive at from this, like, this kind of division between the void and the whole, and then when those two sort of fall onto each other,
mhm,
collide against each other, there's this like immensely generative world that's being created. But what struck me even while watching you kind of, sort of build this thing, was that just that, like, the first thing is that, like, not only have you created an AI generator, the one that we were sort of like are supposedly claiming to are able to enact this kind of magic of creation, and so you've built ones like straight up, but not only have you done that, you've also kind of shown the process by which the arbitrariness by which these things essentially aggregate data and
mhm,
kind of like regurgitate and kind of reformulate just that finite data set in different forms, right? Like, I mean, it's a collage that's essentially taking place. Um, but then taking it to, and also getting the generators that you built to then kind of like start speaking to these algorithms was this kind of nice interplay I felt that was happening. And something that also kind of, you sort of hinted at was that um, by cutting them down to size, like, I mean, in fact, this is something that kind of struck me while kind of looking at the videos you were showing was that at the end of the video, there's this like the algorithm kind of shows you recommended videos based on,
Yeah.
and that can also be a point of like anxiety, right? Like where all of a sudden your interior life, like I mean, stuff you've been engaging with, whatever, is somehow condensed into these 6 thumbnails and put on display, right? But then there's a sheer arbitrariness to that, which is
Yeah.
kind of like, somehow uh, being approximated to what your inner life is, your sort of your inner self is. But then the sheer arbitrariness of it, like where it's literally like say, for example, if you've been watching like say Blender tutorials or listening to a certain song, it's going to just put that and then kind of like uh, morph that into an idea of what a personality should be or like a character should be, right? And you're seeing that arbitrariness play out over there as well. Um, and I think the unpacking of that, like is kind of like on full display in the generators you've built. Thank you so much for sharing. And yeah, I was also wondering how if you had a response to how that interiority is sort of like is being presented by these programs.
Yeah, so like in the beginning when I made these diagrams that there is a void and then emerges a being, and then that being can never be complete because there will be another nothingness that sort of will emerge within it. Like for me, these advertisements and the videos that it recommended me, for me, they are nothingness. Like they have no relation with me directly. And but the way the entire apparatus is designed, I cannot not let them emerge. They will emerge. That I am subscribed to using these platforms, this Zoom, YouTube, all of these, I'm using these, so it will happen. I cannot escape it. And it is, the funny part is it is arbitrary, it is completely arbitrary, but it is not at all arbitrary because when I say it is arbitrary to us, to humans who do not have, who no longer have the capacity to be able to decipher the language with through which these things work. So, like all the videos that came in the recommendation, they were showed because I watch that kind of a content, and they were like they wouldn't have showed me any other video which actually have no relation to. But so it there is a system that is underplay like playing. Like for example, I have set up this world generator. Like I have made a database. I cannot choose which story, like the story will be automatic, but still the framework of the structure, like the database is still controlled by me. Like that was the point of building my own platform instead of using some other free like or paid sort of a platform in the internet, because here I control the database and I can control the level of arbitrariness, or I can control the what kind of arbitrariness I want and what kind of arbitrariness I don't want, because I have the control over the data. Like I can just remove some names from the database or some countries or some nationality, like anything. And no matter how many ever times you generate the story, that story will never have a name, a character of a name XYZ, whatever. So this bias that the structures have shows the fact that it is arbitrary for us, but it is not at all arbitrary. It is completely controlled, it is fully determined. Is the same, like that's why I have stressed on the word PRNG. Like this whole system is working through a PRNG, which is a pseudo random number generator. So it's called pseudo random number generator because nothing is random over here, it's all determined. The complexity of the system is so huge that you as a human, you're not able to perceive the pattern that is at play. So that is why for you it's random, but it's actually determined. So everything is determined. There's nothing generative automatic in AI. It's just that it feels automatic, or that's why AI has this aura of magic around it, because for us it is arbitrary, but actually it's not. And then it is our task to, I think, demystify these systems. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, that idea that these things are capable of creating, some kind of chance is essentially what the kind of like marketing around it is as well, right? Like that they are almost like doing these free expressions or whatever, but then
Mhm.
they're not. Like they're very indeterministic in that sense.
Yeah, and like exactly, like this idea of chance is what is being used to sort of make a big deal out of AI. But this reminds me of the conversation we had on Instagram, that yes, the chance allows, like the contingency allows new possibilities, but the framework within which that contingency is allowed, the game that we are playing is fundamentally unfair, because the way, so there will, by contingency, I will arrive at certain aspects, but the system is designed in such a way that it will not let me arrive to certain aspects that it wants to censor or it wants to control. So yeah, and instead of emphasizing on the chance and the contingency and the wonder or the aura of magic or whatever, it is more helpful to think about these systems as determined.
Yeah, of course.
Mhm.
And then that's Uh, sorry. So the idea of charts itself, like I mean, that you kind of bring in that
Mhm.
each time
Yeah,
you kind of nudge it in a direction, you become the exteriority to
yeah,
the system. I mean, obviously it's a closed system in that sense,
yeah,
but but then you become the sort of contingent factor, so to speak.
yeah. What this contingency shrouds is basically, like there could be, like for example, one of the directions in which my project was going is, like, maybe I can share the screen and I can show it again. Can you see my screen? Can you see my screen?
Yes, yes.
Huh. So the, like for example, this is the world building machine and I have a list, and this is completely arbitrary sort of like this is the list of things, and this, as I was saying, is the seed number. And on the top, these are randomly picked, like see here it says a random number between 1 and C11, which means a random number between 1 and 602, because no, between 1 and 1347, so it selects a number. But here is a number that I control, so I can put a number that I want, like I want 600 everywhere, like, or I want, like most of these they don't have 600, so I can put, like, I can put my own numbers, and I can generate the story that I specifically want. So going back to the compositional way of doing things instead of doing it in a generative manner. So here I choose the story that I want, and because I have the access to the database, like we don't have access to the database of the platforms that we use, but here I have the access to it. So I can just select what I want, and then I can select this number and I can make my own story. And this was another narrative that I was building. Like here, for example, I made my own story of a guy called Zhu Liji, who was a Chinese worker working in the Foxconn company. He committed suicide because of the bad working conditions, and he wrote poems. He was a poet, and things about him basically. And this is a real life story. Like there was actually this guy Zhu Liji. You can see his work; it's amazing. And there are a lot of other stories which are real world stories which need to be told. And I can sort of select that particular story and I can say that, oh, it's a generated story, because the elements from that story exist in this database. And if I just keep generating, there is a very slight possibility that exactly that story, all the elements from that particular story will emerge. So, like how a lot of people are using AI work and saying that, oh, I wrote this paper, but they are actually using AI to do it to reduce their work. Here is the reverse. Like, I am doing a lot of work and I am I'm writing my own story, but I'm faking it by saying AI generated it, because then nobody can question, like, then it becomes this authorless generative story, then my subjectivity cannot be called into question. So this was another approach that I was looking at.
And then that's the larger kind of rhetoric
Yeah.
that's also, Silicon Valley sort of pushing that, like,
Mhm.
that it's beyond our control. We can't
Yeah.
really possibly manage.
Mhm.
But what excited me about also this generator is that, especially because you have inserted real stories.
Mhm.
It reminded me of Borges's Library of Babel, where it's this like
Mhm.
infinite library folding on itself. Much like Sudhir's world, that's kind of
Mhm.
infinite by folding on itself. So you have this library with books, and within that library, you'll have one book which is actually going to tell you the story of your life,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But then there's also books that will tell you stories that claim to be the story of your life,
Yeah.
and which you chance upon, like at least in the library, is like going to then determine the course of action. But yeah, this is incredible. It's beautiful that the world, literal like generative world building process like that you did. Like, okay, thank you.
Thank
Uh,
you.
okay, shall we move on to Aditi next? Thanks, Aditi.
Okay, so I'll be starting with a few images of departure. Can you see the screen?
Yeah.
Okay, so the project is called 1 square feet at a time. And the idea is to uncover the unseen narratives within urban space, which is like an interplay of past, present, and the future. And also like a reflection of the complex relationship between human ambition and the enduring resilience of the natural world. And this is one of the images that I take as the departure point. This image, in a way, can symbolize how the natural forces are subtle yet they have a powerful impact, and the delicate balance within the urban landscape, and how like each square feet can hold stories of interaction balance where natural elements subtly but persistently shape and are shaped by their surroundings. So yeah, this is one of the details of this image. And yeah, so what I tried to do was I tried to sort of create a world within this hollow that was created. Even though the image is quite simple, but then it reveals an entire miniature kind of world within its confines, and like how the urban life can emerge and thrive even in the smallest and the most unexpected places. So this is like the detail. These are some of the images that I generated, which were also like a takeoff point to kind of go back to the previous image. I work a lot with Photoshop, and a lot of the editing that or the images that I've created here are like a blend of the images that I've generated, plus I've kind of taken them to Photoshop and then to and fro. And I'll be just running through the images, and then later I'll be taking to the New Art City project. So this is basically a canvas, and I kind of overlaid images of uh, plants, just a plant here. And the idea was to kind of create a kind of a city map in a grid form with plants growing through the cracks and spaces intertwining with the grid lines. Almost like an interplay of grids and plants. So this is something that I'm currently working upon, and there are iterations I'll be showing for this. So yeah, this is uh, like a patch of land that I clicked within Greater Noida NCR region, and kind of I created these colorful patches which would represent like colorful represent sorry, future buildings. Visualization kind of captures delicate balance between preserving nature and also accommodating urban growth. So this is basically an unedited image that I shot in the complex that I stay in, which kind of highlights the fragile balance and the unseen mysteries in a way. And I also took this as one of the images of departure. Yeah, so this particular one captures vastness, revealing traces of forgotten stories and interplay between urbanization and nature. Okay, I'll just take now to the New Art City project. So this is basically like a translation of how I'm creating like almost like a world within a world and how one thing is leading to the next. So yeah. As you can see, this image also has references of Jantar Mantar. I just also want to show something that I have been working upon, which is like a translation of uh, the ideas and the new art city works that I'm trying to translate into something that's very analog. Um, so I've been trying to sort of translate them into embroideries and also pinhole camera images and also canvases. So these are some of my studio shots, and these are works that are in progress. And yeah, it's like a translation of all these ideas into another format. So yeah, that's it.
Nice, Aditi. So yeah, no, one thing that kind of struck me was that the kind of digital collages you're making, and if you think of like these AI generators also as collage machines, you know, the kind of collage that they generate is attempting a certain kind of cohesion or normativity to, the images that we're to the real, so to speak. There's this sort of idea of believability that they want to create, even if they're stylized and everything. There's this kind of cohesion that they are attempting to create, right? Whereas if then a collage is something that is is a arrangement of images that are in contention with each other, then that kind of like that becomes a refusal of that cohesion. You let the images speak together as well, as opposed to what's happening with, say, Midjourney, where it's going to aggregate essentially. Say when you put in a prompt, it's aggregating a series of prompts that you fed to it, and then it's going to essentially give you an infographic. This is kind of what Matteo Pasquinelli also talks about, where he says that essentially what you're looking at, even with image generators, but also with ChatGPT and the text that it's generating, is essentially an infographic of 100 Google searches on steroids that it's done, and kind of stitched together something that sort of is attempting to be legible and kind of unquestioning. Unquestionable in that sense, because there's that sense, that filter of cohesion that it's trying to present itself with. The rejection of that then becomes like, where you let the image, the kind of collection of images that you're arranging, to allow them to sort of resist that. I felt that shift in your approach sort of like was, it sort of stands in like direct contention with the way these images are sort of being generated. And then the idea of the cube, it is the sort of fundamental like kind of building block, right? Like of even like say Cézanne's approach to like everything can be sort of like arranged in a series of cubes. Essentially, that's what he said. Like the visible world, especially, can be arranged in a series of cubes, and then that kind of propensity of like kind of putting all that is kind of that can be comprehended into a cube, into a square foot space. That becomes like a very particular kind of like categorizing sort of impulse that like we have towards the world as a civilization. We end up like kind of boxing things in like little brackets. And then the resistance of that, like the kind of like the filtering of it, like kind of becomes a especially how do we create images that don't refuse that, like like one idea that we constantly sort of are confronted with, like we, especially if we are like kind of sharing our images online on social media platforms, like where kind of the restrictions of the square kind of keep coming back, right? Like not just in that sense, but like even when you're sharing video, you're expected to kind of like downgrade visual fidelity to a certain extent. We only have certain kinds of frames that are allowed, like so there's a refusal to kind of like engage with things that might not fit that bracket, essentially. And okay, one thing that happened while you were kind of like taking us through the world was I was trying to find out where exactly in the corridor that you did, where exactly you were. And I was kind of like looking at your screen, and then like on my other screen trying to find, okay, that's where she was. And this reminded me of like so this is like where I used to play games like Counter-Strike, in cyber cafes. We do this funny thing where like, you look at the other person's screen to figure out where they are, and then try to like kind of shoot them down. But yeah, I couldn't find you.
No, actually, while I was creating this, I think there was some issue that was happening with the placement thing. So that's why, like I just kind of let it be, and that's what. And and regarding the images, like while I was like kind of generating images, and there were times when I was kind of taking the images that were created on Photoshop to the these AI generators, but I just couldn't really like it didn't really match my aesthetics. So I thought, it's better, let me just keep them raw and then see, like how things kind of evolve and let it take its own time.
And I'm really happy that like you went back to painting after that. Like, like, okay, these toys are fine, I'm just going to go back to painting. Thank you. Okay, so now we have Saya. Um,
So when I got into this workshop, I was already working with AI like systems. I have been working with them for like quite some time with disco diffusion, and even before that, BQGAN and Clip, all of that to generate images. And what struck me in the beginning, and like even with generative AI, is also that everything is like dictated by language and how you like communicate with this like machines. And I was interested in finding out like what and since we are like in this workshop also, we are talking a lot about like with the like advent of these machines and generative AI as such, like how do we define human beings, and we had like conversations around like different philosophies such as post-humanism and transhumanism, and also like with engaging with various texts and everything. Like every time I came back to this idea of like how language like dictates this whole idea like this generative like landscape. So I started like started like sort of doing this like word game where I would break like words down and I would try to like understand like the meaning behind the scenes and how I can place meanings and create like this composite form, which like the generative AI does. Like it takes like pixels from many like from its data bank from composed of like which is like huge number of images or text, and then it like cobbles of it collages a text, a sentence, or an image. So, while I was working with these machines, I thought like, what language am I talking to them in? Like, and what is their language? What is their native language in which they understand, and how do they interpret these like texts that we're like inputting? So, and then like as like hosting the machine, so I was thinking about like what machine are we hosting? Like and it's like what is the hosting the machine to? Like we have like hosting the shell, but what is the hosting the machine like which dictates, and the host also interprets the things that it like spits out. Like it's interpreting and then it's also expressing it in a certain way. So and okay, so I progress to like create certain images through words, because like we are creating these images from words, deriving from words, and I started placing like several words and trying to understand and trying to in a way like uh, not only create words but also meanings like of course the word, and then like the meanings dictate the words. Like I place another word based on the meaning of the first word that I wrote, and sort of in a way to figure out like how like I am interpreting this stuff like through free association and this like stream of consciousness thing, and then what images can I derive out of them, and I created these drawings. I'll not go into much detail on them, but if you can see it was like I was thinking about like these different uh, aspects, like different philosophies and these philosophical concepts and also like scientific concepts, and how they interlink and make this composite world, and how like this different like disparate objects or disparate like images, and taking parts of these images we can also create this like each image is created like in these systems. So and all this time so like there is this famous image which is like and we just wrote about it and talked about it, and how do you interpret this image? Do you see it as a duck or do you see it as a rabbit? And I tried to do it in stable, like I inputted that prompt in a stable diffusion and like tried to like get it to like generate a duck or a rabbit. There is an odd function in a stable diffusion like defined by this pipeline symbol, and then like it would choose like at random between the two, and and it uh, and it did this weird sort of interpretation where it would try to combine the duck or rabbit, whereas this image it could be interpreted as both, they're like stable diffusion like dreamed of it in a different way. So that was interesting for me to find out, and like also it was interesting for me to like find out how like if like it has sometimes been referred that like in the beginning like there was this like model where like Google deep dreaming and like and it is like sometimes like referred to as dreaming, like it's dreamed of by by the machine. But what are these dreams composed of, or how is it interpreting, like is how is the machine translating my language or my dialogue with it, and in what sort of way does it interpret these things? So like, so in that way, like Sahej, like in the beginning of the workshop, like Sahej gave played this game where he would he had a tarot deck and he would pick up a tarot deck and he assigned like seven certain tarot cards to us, and that like formed the basics. Like I started working with that, like it was a page of sorts for me, and I started like collaborating or like communicating or having this dialogue with this transformer, with this like basically word text to text machine. And here like you can see the in the bold are like the sentences which the AI generated, and there were few options and I had to choose between these options, but and it like continually felt like it was almost like this fortune telling thing, this magic or this mysticism that it carries like behind this like AI, that it can like somehow like show you a future, or like when you input images you can imagine a future which you haven't imagined, but then like it draws from some imagination of something, like it is not, it does not come from like nothingness. It is drawing from somewhere, and it is just giving an option, it's just giving a like interpretation of like how it might be, how it might fit into it. So I got with this, like I got this text from like this collaboration or this dialogue, a page of swords, which is a lot less intimidating for some people than the pages of axes and axes. The ones which are not weapons. It might be a good idea to just stick with one sword instead. Like lords and rulers named their swords as if those weapons were some carnivore's pet at their command. They might not be able to see the sword's true form, but they can feel its weight. For a sword to be useful, it needs to come in contact with some material that it can impale. Of what use it is against a ghost? Well, they might be afraid to fight anyone without a body, without fear. A page of swords does not tell you your fortune. What it rather points to is the presence of other symbols on the edges and sides. What do these symbols reveal? They reveal that you are surrounded by more than one symbol. What do these creases efface? They tell us that a piece of paper is not to be taken as a statement. So, like during this collaboration, I like then the world that I would end up making, I ran into some obstacles, and I communicated with the people who made New Art City, and I talked to them about like this script editor, which like suddenly disappeared, and I wanted to inject certain scripts, and then they told me that there were like there was a few line of text, there was a line of text which you can't delete, if you delete then it like disappears. And then so they added they reinstated that feature for me, but then they added like it was a nice communication that I had, and I sort of incorporated them that into my work in this sort of like collaborative process, in this process with. And this for me it symbolized the way we also communicate with AI, like say ChatGPT, where you continuously type text and it will return some other text, and then you to so for a person, when I'm communicating with a person whose existence I do not know of, but through this communication through text, it's almost as if human beings are also artificial intelligences that we communicate with. And they reinstated this feature for me, and they added this line: "May this language never be deleted, lest the entire future feature disappear forthwith." And it felt as if that is something that also it is the tarot card or the text generation or all these generative things that we do. It is also some sort of prophecy that okay, all this thing is dictated by text, all of this machinic, underneath it all there is code. and like we can not really we interpret we understand it to a certain like point when we like think of it, like when you see the like discrete or the made or the composite images or composite sentences, but like beneath it all like there is only text. And then I'm like, of course, like and so this is the PDF that I created, and you can go over it like on the website. And I'll quickly go through the word. So it is basically a dagger piercing an eye, or how you would like to interpret it. And you can navigate to it. You can like fly towards it, and you have like these small objects which you can interact in the midst. So my idea that I was like going through was like what lies beyond this like perceptible like images of the perception of this AI, or like how these AIs are dreaming of these things, and how do we interpret those things and what we find in there. And when we do not understand the language, how we also interpret those in our own ways. And so it takes quite a time to reach there. But once we do, we find certain other objects, which like these objects are also like some of these like most of these objects I created, like I generated AI images, and then these AI images I took them into a software and I drew over them and like made 3D uh, 3D objects out of them, and then I skinned them and put like other layers over them, and it continuously like I thought about how like these objects they can be taken up like, or they can be decontextualized, and like a skin is put over them and they become some other objects, and how like when we approach them, what do they say, and like how do we interpret this like languages, and how do we interpret like the sounds. And all this while working like with with text and with like these different kinds of philosophies, like I came across this like idea, like came out with this concept of paratext. Paratext is something like which is like additional information, like say the cover of a book, or the information about an author, or like footnotes and such. But what if if like a machine, or if like an entity is like its native position, or its position is like its situatedness is within this like machine, like uh, for them like perception or like sight or images, they do not come before words. For them like it's text, like all of it is paratext. Like for example, like this word, like to understand it, like you can refer to this can refer to this text, like which becomes essentially the paratext for that work. So what if like the entire world is like paratext, and one like for that like entity, all of it would be paratext, and meaning would be derived out of the paratext, like, and not the work itself or not the image itself, but from the paratext. So in that sense, like I don't know, like I was thinking about how do we like refine, and what language do we speak in, and what does it talk like say about like the language that we communicate in, and what does it say about like the intelligences. Like for example, in this like workshop, like we shared our ideas, we shared our experiments, and we shared our thoughts. We read these like things and we discussed them. So this becomes a data, and this became the data for like all these works. But for me, I think like the work was situated in the paratext, or in this like communication of ideas, like in between us, like and like through like around like these ideas. So yeah, I mean that's more or less it. Then and in this process, I also like the PDF that I created, I also resorted to this idea of like printers and like printing out this and like drawing over it, and this idea of like the hand that comes in, and that is something that I also thought like even in games, like this idea of like mechanical ability, that is very important. Like Sahej was talking about Counter-Strike, or like even the new variation of it like Valorant, or like all other games, like even what Elden Ring, and like there is this aspect of mechanical ability that you have to hone, like, and which was also like, which is also something similar in art, like to draw something or to sculpt something, you need this, there is this hand of the artist or hand of the person at play. But in this, like in the context of images and in the context of generating and in the context of machines, there is this invisible hand at play. There is no hand as such that you can see. There is no hand of the artist, but there is some invisible hand which is always at play. And so like in this like process, I also like resorted to this idea of like printing out and making collages of my own, much in the same way that this like machines like make collages out of like disparate items and like string them up to create these images and words. And I also made this video where I like observed this like room cleaning bot, and how it like got stuck underneath like a chair, and how it like freed itself, and how it like made sense of the space around it, and how it was recalculating and trying to make sense of this space. So it, which again in a way like made me think about how like this generative AI, or like if the generative AI are like what we talk about like in terms of singularity, or like AI is like forming a consciousness of their own, or like having consciousness of their own being. So like how will they also understand, and what, how will they perceive the world? Because their world is this mechanical world, or is this world of text, is this world of like numbers and symbols, and how do they like resolve this, like resolve their crisis? So yeah, that's it. Yes.
Thank you so much, Sayed. So one thing right from the outset for me was, which was exciting, in your participations, was the, how you foregrounded the sort of esoteric kind of mystical language in which these technologies are not just spoken about but also imagined, right? Like in fact, the line of code that you shared, it reads like an incantation, and something like almost like a commandment that is kind of placed over there. And then that kind of mirrors also the way in which like our very physical real world laws are enacted as well, right? Like they are only enacted after an utterance, it needs to be declared, spoken out aloud by the judge or jury, right? That was one, and also in kind of like this kind of esoteric cartography. One really I mean revelatory thing that came out for me also when you were kind of trying to get the programs to render the no sort, right? And that kind of showed us. Or do you want to talk about it? Yeah.
No, sir, yeah, like uh, the machines, like I actually like, yeah, like a page of sorts with no sorts, like the text that I had generated, I tried included into the generative program, and it could not actually delete the sort. Like it was funny that like it cannot imagine an absence, it cannot imagine negation. Like it is something like negation is always like, it tried to like, it painted the sorts, and then it tried to like obscure the sorts in a way, it like tried to like erase it in a way. And that I think again is like revelatory in a sort of way, that like all these like we talk about like we often talk about like the bias in these systems, and these systems that they're biased in certain way, they're biased to like respond to you in a certain way. So like these biases, they also like, it's like not that these other like voices do not exist, but it's that they're like erased, and somehow like some sort of like and because these machines which are, they are created in certain in such a way that these erasures are not perfect. So like some sort of like things also like come across, like it cannot be completely negated.
Yeah, exactly. Like, that for me also kind of revealed something very fundamental to how these systems are built on an additive approach. So even when you're adding a negative prop, that's still an additive approach, right? Almost like applying clay over and over again. But then to the human mind, comprehending absence, loss, negation, something that isn't there comes quite naturally. Like, I mean, we are able to, that's sort of like a primary sort of like visualization faculty, right? Like where we can imagine that's what a thing that might not happen. Of course, it might have like, it helps us in like survival and things like that. But also like, I mean, as artists, it's like our fundamental kind of like superpower, right? But then this thing isn't capable of it. Like, in fact, those blurry images of swords, like almost like it's erased. It's like, I got this wrong. I need to erase it off. And then just leaving like that, like, blurry sheen of something that looks like a sword on a page was quite, like these erased drawings that it was creating was quite, yeah, quite amazing. And actually, there was one more thing. Yeah. So the idea of the para text, like, especially, or the paragraph, like, is like, again, in etymologically speaking, it's a separation from a separation already, like, so, I was thinking, how does this idea of these separations relate to this like additive process? Like, on one side, it's kind of like, uh, the idea of like these programs kind of encroaching on the creative act, so to speak, is like a separation that it's creating for us, right? Like we step back, because now this thing can handle it. And then the only thing that it can do in and of itself is like an additive approach. It can only keep mounting things over and over again onto its overlay things over and of itself. Like that relation of like, separation and addition, like how did you, like, I was just wondering what your thoughts were on that.
I think like so the creativity is also mired in this mysticism, right? The thing is that like when you like as artists, when you create these objects or things or like text, whatever, like I'm like broadly like regarding the art object as like it can be text, it can be video, it can be like a sculpture, it can be painting, it can be anything. But it essentially like talks in this like other language. It like expresses some things. Like there is a separation, like there is a separation from the literal like world, or in a way like that it cannot be expressed, like it's something that it expresses in some other form. But here, like if it is not uttered or if it is not defined, it cannot express it. So in a way like it can only express something which is literal, like these machine, like the machines. And again, like I think like this creativity or like the way like then it is mystified also in a way that like creative like it is something like comes from the creative, like the creative genius or like the mind of an artist. But it also draws from somewhere. It is some sort of additive and like also like negating aspect of it. You like strip away some things, you put some things, and you make a collage out of it in a way, not mind, which is not always explained. Like it's not like it does not always follow algorithm, but it does have an algorithm when you like work backwards. Yeah, I think. Yeah, I don't know. Like I thought, like your thoughts is train of like thought and the question, but the idea. Sorry, what was the question again?
No, I was just wondering what that prompted for you. It's just like I was just wondering how you were sort of like thinking about it. But yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll just also open it up to everyone in case you have. First of all, thank you so much for staying with us. And yeah, if you have any questions for any of us from the group or like the entire cohort, please fire away. Or you can obviously reach out to us over email, social media. Just or does anyone have any comments, questions, ideas? Okay, I'm sure this is like also a lot for everyone to digest. Taken, like just a few pointers. Please feel free to save the chat. I've shared links to everyone's work in the chat, along with a few links to, also the resources we were looking at. And the idea here was to kind of like open up whatever like we found as a tool set that everyone can use. So there's also readings that we were looking at, and there's also tutorials for the programs that a lot of us use. So yeah, I mean, we're just sharing the toys that we found. And yeah, thank you so much. If should I mean, I know it's been quite long. Shall we call it a day and continue on other parts of the internet? Yeah. Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. Thanks again to everyone for joining us, and I'm really happy we got to share all this fantastic work that everyone's been doing. Right, I'll see you all very soon. Hopefully in person. Yeah. All right. Take care.